Hey everybody, Jay Super Awesome here. I'd like to welcome you all to episode number 22 of my slasher movie archives. In this video, I will be giving my review for New Year's Evil, released in 1980. Don't dare make New Year's resolutions unless you plan to live. New Year's Evil, a celebration of the macabre.
Ballet's here. A crazy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you, ladies.
Ooh, some kind of voice you got there. Sound like the Phantom.
You could call me that.
So you got a name, Phantom?
Call me Evil.
Evil? You bad, honey?
No, just evil.
Okay, so getting into the plot for this one, Diane Blaze Sullivan, the host of a nationally televised punk rock show on New Year's Eve, is receiving calls from a mysterious killer who tells her of his plans to off someone at midnight in each of America's major time zones, and she will be the last. Okay, so getting into my thoughts for this one, New Year's Evil is one of those horror movies that I remember sitting on the rental store shelves back in the day, and for some reason, I never did rent this one. I don't know why. I didn't see New Year's Evil for the first time until a couple of years ago, and after re-watching it this time, my feelings have pretty much stayed the same. It's a decent slasher movie with a pretty wacky concept. What we have here is a killer who is harassing and threatening a rock radio host as she is putting on a show for the Hollywood Hotline on Sunset Boulevard. She is counting down and celebrating the best rock music of the year. And speaking of music, for the most part, I thought the music in this movie was pretty good. I especially like the fact that the movie had a theme song called New Year's Evil. I thought that was pretty cool. But getting back to the story, I kind of feel like you can take what's going on in this movie two different ways. First off, I feel like the intent of the movie is to have you to believe that the killer is traveling across the United States in his Mercedes, driving from time zone to time zone, killing his victims as the new year comes in. So he has a radio, and as the countdown begins, he records the countdown while he murders his victims. Then he plays it back to the radio host who he has been harassing all night. So the killer wants to murder somebody from each of the major U.S. time zones. The problem is that it's just not possible to make it from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast all in one night. I mean, the dude's not Santa Claus, and his Mercedes has no supernatural abilities or Back to the Future type upgrades. The killer is constantly keeping track of the time, and as he even says in the movie, he counts every second. Now, I tried to do a little calculating, but I thought that was just getting way too deep into it, and honestly, that just takes the fun out of the movie. But regardless, it's just not possible, in my opinion, to do all that travel and make it on time. But be sure to comment below and let me know if you agree with me or if you feel differently about it. Now, the second way you can approach this movie storyline, if you choose to, in a more realistic way, you can simply just think of it as the killer was on the West Coast the entire time, and he simply just tunes into the different radio broadcasts across the United States from time zone to time zone while he is murdering his victims. That totally eliminates the plot hole of the travel aspect of the storyline. But honestly, what would be the fun in that? There's no point in thinking about slasher movies in a realistic way. There's one thing that I can say for sure about New Year's Evil. It's definitely a slasher movie that got me to thinking, and probably thinking way too much. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the cast of characters we have in New Year's Evil. The movie centers around Diane Sullivan and how people around her are affected by her self-centered personality. She is better known as Blaze, a Los Angeles disc jockey. She is also known as the First Lady of Rock. She is putting on a late-hour countdown celebration of music and partying. Her in-studio audience are dancing around like zombies while the bands play live music. Seriously, her in-studio audience could easily be passed off as zombies. We also have Richard Sullivan, Diane's husband, who is believed to be off in Palm Springs, getting coked out of his mind. We also have their son, Derek Sullivan, who desperately seeks the approval of his mother. He tries to talk to her, but she seems to be wrapped up in her own career. A few of the noteworthy side characters would be Diane's manager and the police security staffed around the radio concert event. Overall, I have to say that I enjoyed the characters in this movie, and I thought the acting was pretty solid. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the most important part of a slasher movie, that is, the killer and the kills. I like the setup for the killer in this movie and the motivation behind the killing, but considering who the killer is, it does create some plot holes, unfortunately. The killer wants to murder people who are close to Diane, and considering the killer's identity, it's just really odd that they don't recognize him. That's all I'm going to say about that. This movie doesn't waste any time and reveals the killer to us very early on. In fact, we mostly follow the killer through this movie, and I really liked how he referred to himself as evil. It's really fun that the killer will dress up in different disguises throughout the movie. We see him dressed up as a nurse, we see him simply put on a mustache, and we also see him dressed as a priest. The mask that the killer wears at the end of the movie is super cool as well. Now, I have already went into too much detail about the killer traveling from time zone to time zone, but what's odd about it is when the killer calls in after the first murder, and he actually says it was the first murder, it took place during the Eastern Standard Time Zone, and he actually says that it was the Eastern Standard Time Zone. As the viewer, we know it was actually the second kill of the movie. The first being in the studio where Diane is putting on the rock show. So it seems like the killer actually started in the Pacific time zone, then traveled to the Eastern time zone all the way across the country. So now I'm thinking about it, that would mean the killer would have to make 2 cross-country trips all in one night. This movie is seriously messing with my head, or maybe, just maybe, the first murder of the film was done by somebody completely different, which brings me to the ending of the movie. I absolutely love the ending and how it perfectly sets up a sequel. And in my mind, what that could have been, the improvements that could have been made over the first film, well, that could have been something truly special based off the way this movie set things up for a sequel. As far as the kills go in this movie, it has a pretty small body count. I would say there's around 5 kills just to throw out a guess. Most of them are done by Switchblade. We see the knife flip open, and then the movie will cut to the next scene. We do get to see the aftermath of some of the kills, and that's set up quite nicely, but there's not a lot of details put into the actual kills themselves. We see the shadow of a hand holding a knife coming down in a downward motion. But we don't actually get to see the impact of the kill until the body is discovered. The best kill in the movie for me is the girl who gets suffocated. The killer has a bag of weed. He lures her over to take a smell. He throws it over her head and suffocates her. Awesome stuff. I'm not really sure who to recommend this movie to, considering I had trouble wrapping my head around some of its plot holes. With that being said, I still kind of enjoyed it, and I can see myself revisiting this one again at some point. And when I do, I will turn my brain off and enjoy it for what it is. IMDb give it a 4.8. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Remember, evil never dies. It just rests a while. It watches. It waits. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment below. Let me know if you have seen New Year's Evil, or just let me know what you think about my review. And as always, I would like to thank you all for watching.